something to bring you round. China girl, you're heading down. China girl in a Chinatown. Empty hearts in a neon world. Seeking something to bring you round. China girl is pain you found.
All right. Okay. Good morning, and welcome back to another thrilling installment of Storytime Saturdays. I, as ever, am your narrator, Fragath, and ahead of time, I just want to apologize for the past couple weeks. They have been very inconsistent. Um, things have been crazy here. Um, I won't bore anyone with the sordid details, but suffice it to say, it feels roughly like uh, a couple decades worth of dubious karma just got paid back in full over the course of about 2 months. So, with any luck, uh, these will become slightly more consistent, though I doubt it because my work schedule is ramping right up. So we'll see what happens with that. But hopefully, I'll be able to maintain my Monday, Wednesday, Saturday schedule. Um, but we'll see. Um, Alrighty. So, what happened last time? Last time, previously on Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. Let's see. We've been. That's right. YT met Uncle Enzo. Hiro started getting a history lesson, and that is going to continue for the next several chapters. YT is going to get the overwhelming majority of the actual action time, whereas Hiro is going to get the explaining Neil Stephenson's thought process and getting around to some cute ideas, which I approve of. But mostly it's history lesson. A lot of history lesson. It's seriously like 10 chapters of history lesson. But it's entertaining because there's some entertaining takes on the information revealed. But then things will get moving all over again. Um, with any luck, we'll also get to a part where YT will in fact speak with her mother, which would be entertaining. It's short, but she does talk with her mom. All right, let me just have a sip of tea here real quick. Which, in my carelessness, I have allowed to become cold. Okay. Mm. And I think accidentally mixed with some coffee. So that's really unpleasant. Mm. That's good. Okay, dokie. Oh, before anything else, there is an image coming up. So let me boop and boop. There we go. That is centered-ish. That resembles centeredness. Let's go with centered then. Um, boop and boop. I'll turn that back on at the appropriate time. All right, so what happened immediately beforehand? Oh, right. YT followed an armless dude through the metaverse. Uh, he's armless because he was trying to show people a Nam Shub, and Hiro hacked his arms off. And by Nam Shub, I mean a snow crash packet. And then Hiro told YT to follow the guy. And he went out to this unidentified, nondescript giant black cube at the exact opposite side of the metaverse from where everybody else is built up. And Hiro kind of gives the history lesson on that. Uh, Who do you think owns a black cube 20 miles across? Just going on pure irrational bias, I'm guessing L. Bob Reif. Supposedly, he has a big hunk of real estate out in the middle of nowhere where he keeps all the guts of the metaverse. Some of us used to smash into it occasionally when we were out racing motorcycles. Well, gotta go, Pod. Alright, so that wasn't as much of a catch up as I would have liked, but we're going to deal with it. Alright, so moving right along. We'll just keep on trucking. Get my fluids and such set up ahead of time so I don't have to flail for them like a goofball. And it's just gonna do that. Really? Really? You're gonna do me like this? You're really gonna do me like this? One sec. It's probably not gonna work, but I'm gonna try it anyway. That's going where again? That is going there. Let me fix that. That's why, because it's going to the wrong location. I'm trying to record these as well, in case I ever want to use it as a work portfolio for doing books on tape. So sometimes that does not work as well as I would like. So let's try that again. And no. Okay, whatever. We'll just proceed and I'll deal with it later. I don't care. Okay. Chapter 28. Hiro hangs up and walks into the new room. The librarian follows. It is about 50 feet on a side. The center of the space is occupied by three large artifacts, or rather, three-dimensional renderings of artifacts. In the center is a thick slab of baked clay, hanging in space, about the size of a coffee table and about a foot thick. Hiro suspects that it is a magnified rendering of a smaller object. The broad surfaces of the slab are entirely covered with angular writing that Hiro recognizes as cuneiform. Around the edges are rounded, parallel depressions that appear to have been made by fingers as they shaped the slab. To the right of the slab is a wooden pole with branches on top, sort of a stylized tree. To the left of the slab is an 8-foot high obelisk, also covered with cuneiform, with a bas relief figure chiseled into the top, which is this right here. Oh, do I have that other image? I do. Okay, good. Um, that is an image ripped straight from the book, right there. So that is the image you're looking at. Or Hiro is looking at, rather, and you are too now. The room is filled with a three-dimensional constellation of hypercards, hanging weightlessly in the air. It looks like a high-speed photograph of a blizzard in progress. In some places, the hypercards are placed in precise geometric patterns, like atoms in a crystal. In other places, whole stacks of them are clumped together. Drifts of them have accumulated in the corners, as though Lagos tossed them away when he finished. Hiro finds that his avatar can walk right through the hypercards without disturbing the arrangement. It is, in fact, the three-dimensional counterpart of a messy desktop, all the trash still remaining wherever Lagos left it. The cloud of hypercards extends to every corner of the 50 by 50 foot space, and from floor level all the way up to about 8 feet, which is about as high as Lagos's avatar could reach. How many hypercards in here? 10,463, the librarian says. I don't really have time to go through them, Hiro says. Can you give me some idea of what Lagos was working on in here? Well, I can read back the names of all the cards if you'd like. Lagos studied them, grouped them into four broad categories: biblical studies, Sumerian studies, neurolinguistic studies, and intel gathered on L. Bob Reif. Without going into that kind of detail, what did Lagos have on his mind? What was he getting at? What do I look like, a psychologist? The librarian says. I can't answer those kinds of questions. Let me try it again. How does this stuff connect, if at all, to the subject of viruses? The connections are elaborate. Summarizing them would require both creativity and discretion. As a mechanical entity, I have neither. How old is this stuff? Hiro says, gesturing to the three artifacts. The clay envelope is Sumerian. It is from the 3rd millennium BC. It was dug up from the city of Eridu in southern Iraq. The black stele, or obelisk, is the Code of Hammurabi, which dates from about 1750 BC. The tree-like structure is a Yahwistic cult totem from Palestine. It is called an Asherah. It's from about 900 BC. Did you call that slab an envelope? Yes, it has a smaller clay slab wrapped up inside of it. This was how the Sumerians made tamper-proof documents. All these things are in a museum somewhere, I take it. The Asherah and the Code of Hammurabi are in museums. The clay envelope is in the personal collection of L. Bob Reif. L. Bob Reif is obviously interested in this stuff. Reif Bible College, which he founded, has the richest archaeology department in the world. They have been conducting a dig in Eridu, which was the cult center of a Sumerian god named Enki. How are these things related to each other? The librarian raises his eyebrows. I'm sorry? Well, let's try process of elimination. Do you know why Lagos found Sumerian writings interesting as opposed to, say, Greek or Egyptian? Egypt was a civilization of stone. They made their art and architecture of stone, so it lasts forever. But you can't write on stone. So they invented papyrus and wrote on that. But papyrus is perishable, so even though their art and architecture have survived, their written records, their data, have largely disappeared. What about all those hieroglyphic inscriptions? Bumper stickers, Lagos called them. Corrupt political speech. They had an unfortunate tendency to write inscriptions praising their own military victories before the battles had actually taken place. And Sumer is different? Sumer was a civilization of clay. They made their buildings of it and wrote on it too. Their statues were of gypsum, which dissolves in water, so the buildings and statues have since fallen apart under the elements. But the clay tablets were either baked or else buried in jars. So all the data of the Sumerians have survived. Egypt left a legacy of art and architecture. Sumer's legacy is its megabytes. How many megabytes? As many as archaeologists bother to dig up. The Sumerians wrote on everything. When they built a building, they would write in cuneiform on every brick. When the buildings fell down, these bricks would remain scattered across the desert. In the Koran, the angels who are sent to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah say, "We are sent forth to a wicked nation, so that we may bring down on them a shower of clay stones, marked by your Lord for the destruction of the sinful." Lagos found this interesting, this promiscuous dispersal of information, written on a medium that lasts forever. He spoke of pollen blowing in the wind. I gather that this was some kind of analogy. It was. Tell me, has the inscription on this clay envelope been translated? Yes, it is a warning. It says, "This envelope contains the Nam Shub of Enki." I know what a Nam Shub is. What is the Nam Shub of Enki? The librarian stares off into the distance and clears his throat dramatically. Once upon a time there was no snake, there was no scorpion, there was no hyena, there was no lion, there was no wild dog, no wolf, there was no fear, no terror. Man had no rival. In those days, the land of Shubur Hamazi, harmony-tongued Sumer, the land of the May of princeship, Uri, the land having all that is appropriate, the land Martu, resting in security, the whole universe, the people well cared for, to Enlil in one tongue gave speech. Then the Lord defiant, the Prince defiant, the King defiant, Enki, the Lord of abundance, whose commands are trustworthy, the Lord of wisdom, who scans the land, the leader of the gods, the Lord of Eridu, endowed with wisdom, changed the speech in their mouths, put contention into it, into the speech of man that had been won. That is Kramer's translation. That's a story, Hiro says. I thought a Nam Shub was an incantation. The Nam Shub of Enki is both a story and an incantation, the librarian says. A self-fulfilling fiction. Lagos believed that in its original form, which this translation only hints at, it actually did what it describes. You mean changed the speech in men's mouths? Yes, the librarian says. This is a Babel story, isn't it? Hiro says. Everyone was speaking the same language, and then Enki changed their speech so that they could no longer understand each other. This must be the basis for the Tower of Babel stuff in the Bible. This room contains a number of cards tracing that connection, the librarian says. You mentioned before that at one point everyone spoke Sumerian. Then nobody did. It just vanished, like the dinosaurs. There's no genocide to explain how that happened, which is consistent with the Tower of Babel story and the Nam-Shub of Enki. Did Lagos think that Babel really happened? He was sure of it. He was quite concerned about the vast number of human languages. He felt there were simply too many of them. How many? Tens of thousands. In many parts of the world, you will find people of the same ethnic group living a few miles apart in similar valleys and under similar conditions, speaking languages that have absolutely nothing in common with each other. This sort of thing is not an oddity, it is ubiquitous. Many linguists have tried to understand Babel, but the question of why human language tends to fragment rather than converging on a human tongue. Has anyone come up with an answer yet? The question is difficult and profound, the librarian says. Lagos had a theory. Yes? He believed that Babel was an actual historical event, that it happened in a particular time and place, coinciding with the disappearance of the Sumerian language, that prior to Babel Infocalypse, languages tended to converge, and that afterward, languages have always had an innate tendency to diverge and become mutually incomprehensible, that this tendency is, as he put it, coiled like a serpent around the human brainstem. The only thing that could explain that is... Hiro stops, not wanting to say it. Yes, the librarian says. If there was some phenomenon that moved through the population, altering their minds in such a way that they couldn't process the Sumerian language anymore. Kind of in the same way that a virus moves from one computer to another, damaging each computer in the same way, coiling around the brainstem. Lagos devoted much time and effort to this idea, the librarian says. He felt that the Nam-Shub of Enki was a neurolinguistic virus. And that this Enki character was a real personage? Possibly. And that Enki invented this virus and spread it throughout Sumer using tablets like this one? Yes, a tablet has been discovered containing a letter to Enki in which the writer complains about it. A letter to a god? Yes, it is from Sin Samu, the scribe. He begins by praising Enki and emphasizing his devotion to him. Then he complains. Like a young, line broken, I am paralyzed at the wrist. Like a wagon on the road when its yoke has split, I stand immobile on the road. On a bed called Oh and Oh no, I let out a wail. My graceful figure is stretched neck to ground. I am paralyzed of foot. My ellipsis has been carried off into the earth. My frame has changed. At night I cannot sleep. My strength has been struck down. My life is ebbing away. The bright day is made a dark day for me. I have slipped into my own grave. I, a writer who knows many things, am made a fool. My hand has stopped writing. There is no talk in my mouth. After more description of his woes, the scribe ends with, My God, it is you I fear. I have written you a letter. Take pity on me. The heart of my God, have it given back to me. For some actual historical reference, I also have the actual tablet itself right there. Or a stellar bas relief. 8 foot high obelisk. You can't see, but at the very bottom, there's a whole lot of cuneiform rolling around down there, right under their feet. It's there's symbolism there, I tell you. And that's, of course, what our good friend Neil Stevenson is getting at. There's another one, a nice little whammy coming up in a little bit, and some of you who may have heard or read this book before probably know what it is. And maybe the more observant of you have even noticed in that previous picture, but I've got another zoomed in picture that's actually in the book, which will illuminate that quite well. Chapter 29. YT is maxing at a mom's truck stop on 405, waiting for her ride. Not that she would ever be caught dead at a mom's truck stop. If, like, a semi ran her over with all 18 of its wheels in front of a mom's truck stop, she would drag herself down the shoulder of a highway using her eyelid muscles until she reached a snoozin' cruise full of horny derelicts, rather than go to a mom's truck stop. But sometimes, when you're a professional, they give you a job you don't like, and you just have to be very cool and put up with it. For purposes of this evening's job, the man with the glass eye has already supplied her with a driver and security person, as he put it. A totally unknown quantity. YT isn't sure she likes putting up with some mystery guy. She has this image in her mind that he's going to be like the wrestling coach at the high school. That would be so grotendous. Anyway, this is where she's supposed to meet him. YT orders a coffee and a slice of cherry pie a la mode. She carries them over to the public street terminal back in the corner. It is sort of a wraparound stainless steel booth stuck between a phone booth, which has a homesick truck driver poured into it, and a pinball machine, which features a chick with big boobs that light up when you shoot the ball up the magic fallopians. She's not that good at the metaverse, but she knows her way around, and she's got an address. After finding an address in the metaverse shouldn't be any more difficult than doing it in reality, at least if you're not a totally retarded ped. As soon as she steps out into the street, people start giving her these looks. The same kind of looks that people give her when she walks through the worsted wool desolation of the Westlake Corporate Park in her dynamic blue and orange courier gear. She knows that the people in the street are giving her dirty looks because she's just coming in from a shitty public terminal. She's a trashy black and white person. The built-up part of the street, around Port Zero, forms a luminescent thunderhead off to her right. She puts her back into it and climbs into she puts her back to it, sorry, and climbs onto the monorail. She'd like to go into town, but that's an expensive part of the street to visit, and she'd be dumping money into the coin slot about every 1/10 of a millisecond. The guy's name is Ng. In reality, he is somewhere in Southern California. YT isn't sure exactly what he is driving, some kind of van full of what the man with the glass eye described as stuff. Really incredible stuff that you don't need to know about. In the metaverse, he lives outside town, around Port 2, where things really start to spread out. Ng's metaverse home is a French colonial villa in the pre-war city of Mai Tho in the Mekong Delta. Visiting him is like going to Vietnam in about 1955, except that you don't have to get all sweaty. In order to make room for this creation, he has laid claim to a patch of metaverse space a couple miles off the street. There's no monorail service in this low rent development, so YT's avatar has to walk the entire way. He has a large office with French doors and a balcony looking out over endless rice paddies where little Vietnamese people work. Clearly, this guy is a fairly hardcore techie, because YT counts hundreds of people out in his rice paddies, plus dozens more running around the village, all of them fairly well rendered, and all of them doing different things. She's not a bithead, but she knows that this guy is throwing a lot of computer time into the task of creating a realistic view out of his office window, and the fact that it's Vietnam makes it twisted and spooky. YT can't wait to tell Roadkill about this place. She wonders if it has bombings and strafings and napalm drops. That would be the best. Ng himself, or at least Ng's avatar, is a small, very dapper Vietnamese man in his 50s, hair plastered to his head, wearing military style khakis. At the time YT comes into his office, he is leaning forward in his chair, getting his shoulders rubbed by a geisha. A geisha in Vietnam? YT's grandpa, who was there for a while, told her that the Nipponese took over Vietnam during the war and treated it with the cruelty that was their trademark before we nuked them and they discovered that they were pacifists. The Vietnamese, like most other Asians, hate the Japanese. And apparently, this Ng character gets a kick out of the idea of having a Japanese geisha around to rub his back. But it is a very strange thing to do for one reason. The geisha is just a picture on Ng's goggles, and on YT's, and you can't get a massage from a picture. So why bother? When YT comes in, Ng stands up and bows. This is how hardcore street wackos greet each other. They don't like to shake hands because you can't actually feel the contact and it reminds you that you're not even really there. Yeah, hi, YT says. Ng sits back down, and the geisha goes right back to it. Ng's desk is a nice French antique with a row of small television monitors along the back edge, facing toward him. He spends most of his time watching the monitors, even when he is talking. They told me a little about you, Ng says. Shouldn't listen to nasty rumors, YT says. Ng picks up a glass from his desk and takes a drink from it. It looks like a mint julep. Globes of condensation form on its surface, break loose, and trickle down the side. The rendering is so perfect that YT can see a miniaturized reflection of the office windows in each drop of condensation. It's just totally ostentatious. What a bithead. He is looking at her with a totally emotionless face, but YT imagines that it is a face of hate and disgust. To spend all this money on the coolest house in the metaverse and then have some skater come in done up in a grainy black and white. It must be a real kick in the metaphorical nuts. Somewhere in this house, a radio is going, playing a mix of Vietnamese loungy type stuff and Yank wheelchair rock. Are you a Nova Sicilian citizen? Ng says. No, I just chill sometimes with Uncle Enzo and the other Mafia dudes. Ah, very unusual. Ng is not a man in a hurry. He has soaked up the languid pace of the Mekong Delta and is content to sit there and watch his TV sets and fire off a sentence every few minutes. Another thing. He apparently has Tourette's syndrome or some other brain woes because from time to time, for no apparent reason, he makes strange noises with his mouth. They have the twangy sound that you always hear from Vietnamese when they are in the back rooms of stores and restaurants carrying on family disputes in the mother tongue, but as far as YT can tell, they aren't real words, just sound effects. Do you work for a lot of these guys? Do you work a lot for these guys? YT asks. Occasional small security jobs. Unlike most large corporations, the Mafia has a strong tradition of handling its own security arrangements. But when something especially technical is called for, he pauses in the middle of this sentence to make an incredible zooming sound in his nose. Is that your thing, security? Scans all of his TV sets. He snaps his fingers, and the geisha scurries out of the room. He folds his hands together on his desk and leans forward. He stares at YT. Yes, he says. YT looks back at him for a bit, waiting for him to continue. After a few seconds, his attention drifts back to the monitors. I do most of my work under a large contract with Mr. Lee, he blurts. YT is waiting for the continuation of this sentence. Not Mr. Lee, but Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong. Oh well, if she can drop Uncle Enzo's name, he can drop Mr. Lee's. The social structure of any nation-state is ultimately determined by its security arrangements, Ng says, and Mr. Lee understands this. Oh wow, we're going to be profound now. Ng is suddenly talking like the old white men on the TV pundit powwows, which YT's mother watches obsessively. Instead of hiring a large human security force, which impacts the social environment, lots of minimum wage earners standing around carrying machine guns, Mr. Lee prefers to use non-human systems. Non-human systems. YT is about to ask him, what do you know about the rat thing? But it is pointless. He won't say. It would get their relationship off on the wrong foot. YT asking for intel that he would never give her, and that would make this whole scene even weirder than it is now, which YT can't even imagine. Bursts forth with a long string of twangy noises, pops, and glottal stops. Fucking bitch, he mumbles. Excuse me? Nothing, he says. A bimbo box cut me off. None of these people understand that with this vehicle I could crush them like a pot-bellied pig under an armored personnel carrier. A bimbo box? You're driving? Yes, I'm coming to pick you up, remember? Do you mind? No, he sighs, as if he really does. YT gets up and walks around behind his desk to look. Each of the little TV monitors is showing a different view out of his van. Windshield, left window, right window, rear view. Another one has an electronic map showing his position, inbound on the San Bernardino, not far away. The van is under voice command, he explains. I removed the steering wheel and pedal interface because I found verbal commands more convenient. This is why I will sometimes make unfamiliar sounds with my voice. I am controlling the vehicle's systems. YT signs off from the metaverse for a while to clear her head and take a leak. When she takes off the goggles, she discovers that she has built up quite an audience of truckers and mechanics who are standing around the terminal booth in a semicircle listening to her jabber at When she stands up, attention shifts to her butt, naturally. YT hits the bathroom, finishes her pie, and wanders out into the ultraviolet glare of the setting sun to wait for Recognizing his van is easy enough. It is enormous. It is 8 feet high and wider than it is high, which would have made it a wide load in the old days when they had laws. The construction is boxy and angular. It has been welded together out of the type of flat, dimpled steel plate usually used to make manhole lids and stair treads. The tires are huge, like tractor tires with a more subtle tread, and there are 6 of them, 2 axles in back and 1 in front. The engine is so big that, like an evil spaceship in a movie, YT feels its rumbling in her ribs before she can see it. It is kicking out diesel exhaust through a pair of squat, vertical red smokestacks that project from the roof toward the rear. The windshield is a perfectly flat rectangle of glass about 3 by 8 feet. Smoked so black that YT can't make out an outline of anything inside. The snout of the van is festooned with every type of high-powered light known to science, like this guy hit a new South Africa franchise on a Saturday night and stole every light off every roll bar, and a grill has been constructed across the front, welded together out of rails torn out of an abandoned railroad somewhere. The grill alone probably weighs more than a small car. The passenger door swings open. YT walks over and climbs into the front seat. Hi, she is saying. You need to take a whiz or anything? Isn't there. Or maybe he is. Where the driver's seat ought to be, there is a sort of neoprene pouch about the size of a garbage can suspended from the ceiling by a web of straps, shock cords, tubes, wires, fiber optic cables, and hydraulic lines. It is swathed in so much stuff that it is hard to make out its actual outlines. At the top of this pouch, YT can see a patch of skin with some black hair around it, the top of a balding man's head. Everything else, from the temples downward, is encased in an enormous goggle slash mask slash headphone slash feeding tube unit, held onto his head by smart straps that are constantly tightening and loosening themselves to keep the device comfortable and properly positioned. Below this, on either side, where you'd sort of expect to see arms, where you'd sort of expect to see arms, huge bundles of wires, fiber optics, and tubes run up out of the floor and are seemingly plugged into Ng's shoulder sockets. There's a similar arrangement where his legs are supposed to be attached, and more stuff going into his groin and hooked up to various locations on his torso. The entire thing is swathed in a one-piece coverall, a pouch, larger than his torso ought to be, that is constantly bulging and throbbing as though alive. Thank you, all my needs are taken care of, Ng says. The door slams shut behind her. Ng makes a yapping sound, and the van pulls out onto the frontage road, headed back toward 405. Please excuse my appearance, he says, after a couple of awkward minutes. My helicopter caught fire during the evacuation of Saigon in 1974, a stray tracer from ground forces. Wow, what a drag. I was able to reach an American aircraft carrier off the coast, but you know, the fuel was spraying around quite a bit during the fire. Yeah, I can imagine. Uh-huh. I tried prostheses for a while. Some of them are very good, but nothing is as good as a motorized wheelchair. And then I got to thinking, why do motorized wheelchairs when they have to be tiny, pathetic things that strain to go up a little teeny ramp? So I bought this. It is an airport fire truck from Germany, and converted it into my new motorized wheelchair. It's very nice. America is wonderful because you can get anything on a drive-through basis. Oil change, liquor, banking, car wash, funerals, anything you want. Drive through. So this vehicle is much better than a tiny pathetic wheelchair. It is an extension of my body. When the geisha rubs your back? Mumbles something and his pouch begins to throb and undulate around his body. She is a daemon, of course. As for the massage, my body is suspended in an contractive gel that massages me when I need it. I also have a Swedish girl and an African woman, but those daemons are not as well rendered. And the mint julep? Through a feeding tube. Non-alcoholic. Aha. So, YT says at some point when they are way past LAX and she figures it's too late to chicken out. What's the plan? Do we have a plan? We go to Long Beach, to the Terminal Island Sacrifice Zone, and we buy some drugs, Ng says. Or you do, actually, since I am indisposed. That's my job? To buy some drugs? Buy them and throw them up in the air. In a sacrifice zone? Yes, and we'll take care of the rest. Who's we, dude? There are several more, entities that will help us. What? Is the back of the van full of more people like you? Sort of, Ng says. You are close to the truth. Would these be like non-human systems? That is a sufficiently all-inclusive term, I think. YT figures that for a big yes. You tired? Want me to drive or anything? Laughs sharply, like a distant ack, and the van almost swerves off the road. YT doesn't get the sense that he is laughing at the joke. He is laughing at what a jerk YT is. Ack in this case, of course, being an anti-aircraft gun. Whoops! I just messed up where my location in the book is. Oh no! There we are. Okay, back to history lessons. I have another image later for around a couple chapters from now. Hoping to get to about chapter 35 is my hope. It's a good like 40 pages from now. So we'll see. We'll see where we are around 2 p.m. my time, Eastern Standard, and we will go from there. If we are on pace for that, and it'll only be an extra 15 minutes to half an hour, great. If it's going to be like another hour, well, I have things to do today. So, chapter 30. Okay, last time we were talking about the clay envelope. But what about this thing? The thing that looks like a tree, Hiro says, gesturing to one of the artifacts. A totem of the goddess Asherah, the librarian says crisply. Now we're getting somewhere, Hiro says. Lagos said that the brandy in the Black Sun was a cult prostitute of Asherah. So who is Asherah? She was the consort of El, who is also known as Yahweh, the librarian says. She also is known by other names. Elat, her most common epithet. The Greeks knew her as Dione or Rhea. The Canaanites knew her as Tanit or Hawa, which is the same thing as Eve. Eve? The etymology of Tanit, proposed by Cross, is feminine of Tannin, which would mean the one of the serpent. Furthermore, Asherah carried a second epithet in the Bronze Age, Dat Batni, also the one of the serpent. The Sumerians knew her as Nintu, or Ninhursag. Her symbol is a serpent coiling around a tree or staff. The Caduceus. Who worshipped Asherah? A lot of people, I gather. Everyone who lived between India and Spain from the 2nd millennium BC up to the Christian era, with the exception of the Hebrews, who only worshipped her until the religious reforms of Hezekiah and, later, Josiah. I thought the Hebrews were monotheists. How could they worship Asherah? Monolatrists. They did not deny the existence of other gods, but they were only supposed to worship Yahweh. Asherah was venerated as the consort of Yahweh. I don't remember anything about God having a wife in the Bible. The Bible didn't exist at that point. Judaism was just a loose collection of Yahwistic cults, each with different shrines and practices. The stories about the Exodus hadn't been formalized into scripture yet, and the later parts of the Bible had not yet happened. Who decided to purge Asherah from Judaism? The Deuteronomic school, defined by convention as the people who wrote the book of Deuteronomy, as well as Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And what kind of people were they? Nationalists, monarchists, centralists, the forerunners of the Pharisees. At this time, the Assyrian king Sargon II had recently conquered Samaria, northern Israel, forcing a migration of Hebrews southward into Jerusalem. Jerusalem expanded greatly, and the Hebrews began to conquer territory to the west, east, and south. It was a time of intense nationalism and patriotic fervor. The Deuteronomic school embodied those attitudes in Scripture by rewriting and reorganizing the old tales. Rewriting them how? Moses and others believed that the river Jordan was the border of Israel, but the Deuteronomists believed that Israel included Transjordan, which justified aggression to the east. There are many other examples. The Deuteronomic law said nothing about a monarch. The law, as laid down by the Deuteronomic school, reflected a monarchist system. The pre-Deuteronomic law was largely concerned with sacred matters, while the Deuteronomic law's main concern is the education of the king and his people. Secular matters, in other words. The Deuteronomists, I'm going to get that right one of these days, the Deuteronomists insisted on centralizing the religion in the Temple of Jerusalem, destroying the outlying cult centers. And there is another feature that Lagos found significant, and that is Deuteronomy is the only book in the Pentateuch that refers to a written Torah as comprising the divine will. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, from that which is in charge of the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes, and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brethren, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, and he and his children in Israel. Deuteronomy 17:18-20. So the Deuteronomists codified the religion, made it into an organized, self-propagating entity, Hiro says. I don't want to say virus, but according to what you just quoted me, the Torah is like a virus. It uses the human brain as a host. The host, the human, makes copies of it, and more humans come to synagogue and read it. I cannot process an analogy, but what you say is correct insofar as this. After the Deuteronomists had reformed Judaism, instead of making sacrifices, the Jews went to synagogue and read the book. If not for the Deuteronomists, the world's monotheists would still be sacrificing animals and propagating their beliefs through the oral tradition. Sharing needles, Hiro says. When you were going over this stuff with Lagos, did he ever say anything about the Bible being a virus? He said it had certain things in common with a virus, but that it was different. He considered it a benign virus, like that used for vaccinations. He considered the Asherah virus to be more malignant, capable of being spread through the exchange of bodily fluids. So the strict book-based religion of the Deuteronomists inoculated the Hebrews against the Asherah virus. In combination with strict monogamy and other kosher practices, yes, the librarian says. The previous religions, from Sumer up to Deuteronomy, are known as pre-rational. Judaism was the first of the rational religions. As such, in Lagos's view, it was much less susceptible to viral infection because it was based on fixed written records. This was the reason for the veneration of the Torah and the exacting care used when making new copies of it. Informational hygiene. What are we living in nowadays? The post-rational era? Juanita made comments to that effect. I'll bet she did. She's starting to make more sense to me, Juanita is. Oh, she never really made much sense before. I see. I think that if I can just spend enough time with you to figure out what's on Juanita's mind, well, wonderful things could happen. I will try to be of assistance. Back to work. This is no time for a hard-on. It seems that Asherah was a carrier of viral information. The Deuteronomists somehow realized this and exterminated her by blocking all the vectors by which she infected new victims. With reference to viral infections, the librarian says, if I may make a fairly blunt, spontaneous cross-reference, something I am coded to do at opportune moments, you may wish to examine herpes simplex, a virus that takes up residence in the nervous system and never leaves. It is capable of carrying new genes into existing neurons and genetically re-engineering them. Modern gene therapists use it for this purpose. Lagos thought that herpes simplex might be a modern, benign descendant of Asherah. Not always benign, Hiro says, remembering a friend of his who died of AIDS-related complications. In the last days, he had herpes lesions from his lips all the way down his throat. It's only benign because we have immunities. Yes, sir. So, did Lagos think that the Asherah virus actually altered the DNA of brain cells? Yes, this was the backbone of his hypothesis that the virus was able to transmute itself from a biologically transmitted string of DNA into a set of behaviors. What behaviors? What was Asherah worship like? Did they do sacrifices? No, but there is evidence of cult prostitutes, both male and female. Does that mean what I think it does? Religious figures who would hang around the temple and fuck people? More or less. Bingo. Great way to spread a virus. Now, I want to jump back to an earlier fork in the conversation. As you wish, I can handle nested forkings to a virtually infinite depth. You made a connection between Asherah and Eve. Eve, whose biblical name is Hawa, is clearly the Hebrew interpretation of an older myth. Hawa is an Ophidian mother goddess. Ophidian? Associated with serpents. Asherah is also an Ophidian mother goddess, and both are associated with trees as well. Eve, as I recall, is considered responsible for getting Adam to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is to say, it's not just fruit, it's data. If you say so, sir. I wonder if viruses have always been with us or not. There's sort of an implicit assumption that they have been around forever, but maybe that's not true. Maybe there was a period of history when they were non-existent, or at least unusual. And at a certain point, when the metavirus showed up, the number of different viruses exploded, and people started getting sick a whole lot. That would explain the fact that all cultures seem to have a myth about paradise and the fall from paradise. Perhaps. You told me that the Essenes thought that tapeworms were demons. If they'd known what a virus was, they probably would have thought the same thing. And Lagos told me the other night that, according to the Sumerians, there was no concept of good and evil per se. Correct. According to Kramer and Meyer, there are good demons and bad demons. Good ones bring physical and emotional health. Evil ones bring disorientation and a variety of physical and emotional ills. But these demons can hardly be distinguished from the diseases they personify, and many of the diseases sound, to modern ears, as though they must be psychosomatic. That's what the doctors said about Defivid, that his disease must be psychosomatic. I don't know anything about Defivid except for some rather banal statistics. It's as though good and evil were invented by the writer of Adam and Eve legend to explain why people get sick, why they have physical and mental viruses. So when Eve, or Asherah, got Adam to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, she was introducing the concept of good and evil into the world, introducing the metavirus, which creates viruses. Could be. So my next question is, who wrote the Adam and Eve legend? This is a source of much scholarly argument. What did Lagos think? More to the point, what did Juanita think? Nicholas Wyatt's radical interpretation of the Adam and Eve story supposes that it was, in fact, written as a political allegory by the Deuteronomists. I thought they wrote the later books, not Genesis. True, but they were involved in compelling and editing, compiling. True, but they were involved in compiling and editing the earlier books as well. For many years it was assumed that Genesis was written sometime around 900 BC, or even earlier, long before the advent of the Deuteronomists. But more recent analysis of the vocabulary and content suggests that a great deal of editorial work, possibly even authorial work, took place around the time of the exile, when the Deuteronomists held sway. So they may have rewritten an earlier Adam and Eve myth. They appear to have had ample opportunity. According to the interpretation of Fidberg and later Wyatt, Adam in his garden is a parable for the king in his sanctuary, specifically King Hosea, who ruled the northern kingdom until it was conquered by Sargon II in 722 BC. That's the conquest you mentioned earlier, the one that drove the Deuteronomists southward toward Jerusalem. Exactly. Now, Eden, which can be understood simply as the Hebrew word for delight, stands for the happy state in which the king existed prior to the conquest. The expulsion from Eden to the bitter lands to the east is a parable for the massive deportation of Israelites to Assyria following Sargon II's victory. According to this interpretation, the king was enticed away from the path of righteousness by the cult of El, with its associated worship of Asherah, who is commonly associated with serpents and whose symbol is a tree. And his association with Asherah somehow caused him to be conquered. So, when the Deuteronomists reached Jerusalem, they recast the Adam and Eve story as a warning to the leaders of the southern kingdom. Yes, and perhaps because no one was listening to them, perhaps they invented the concept of good and evil in the process as a hook. Hook? Industry term. Then what happened? Did Sargon II try to conquer the southern kingdom also? His successor, Sennacherib, did. King Hezekiah, who ruled the southern kingdom, prepared for the attack feverishly, making great improvements in the fortifications of Jerusalem, improving its supply of drinking water. He was also responsible for a far-reaching series of religious reforms, which he undertook under the direction of the Deuteronomists. How did it work out? The forces of Sennacherib surrounded Jerusalem. And that night the angel of the Lord went forth, and slew 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when men arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed. 2 Kings 19:35 to 36. I'll bet he did. So, let me get this straight. The Deuteronomists, through Hezekiah, impose a policy of informational hygiene on Jerusalem and do some civil engineering work. You said they worked on the water supply? They stopped all the springs and the brook that flowed through the land, saying, Why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water? 2 Chronicles 32:4. Then the Hebrews carved a tunnel 1,700 feet through solid rock to carry that water inside solid city walls. And then as soon as Sennacherib's soldiers came on the scene, they all dropped dead of what can only be understood as an extremely virulent disease, to which the people of Jerusalem were apparently immune. Interesting. I wonder what got into their water. Hola, Lords Flores Gonzalez. Hola. Sorry, I didn't see your message before. I've been sort of focused on reading the book as opposed to looking up at my messages. Don't like to interrupt myself in the middle. But hi. Hope you're enjoying. I realize some of those bits I kind of read a little more quickly than I would have liked. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Where did we start? We started back where? Started back here, I think. Just checking to see how much I've read. So yeah, I can probably get this next bit done then. I can get up to chapter 35. We're basically 2/3 of the way through the book right now. A little more than half. We'll be a little over 2/3 of the way done by the time today ends. So it'll be like another, I don't know, if it's been 6 installments, it'll be another like 4 probably at most. Alrighty. I've also got to go and organize how these are set up on YouTube so they're more easy to see in order. Alrighty. I'm going to get another slug of water here. Oy. Chapter 31. YT doesn't get down to Long Beach very much, but when she does, she will do just about anything to avoid the sacrifice zone. It's an abandoned shipyard the size of a small town. It sticks out into San Pedro Bay, where the older, nastier burbclaves of the basin, unplanned burbclaves of tiny asbestos-shingled houses patrolled by beetle-browed Campuchian men with pub shotguns, fade off into the foam-kissed beaches. Most of it's on the appropriately named Terminal Island, and since her plank doesn't run on the water, that means she can only get in or out by one access road. Like all sacrifice zones, this one has a fence around it, with yellow metal signs wired to it every few yards. Sacrifice Zone. Warning! The National Park Service has declared this area to be a National Sacrifice Zone. The Sacrifice Zone program was developed to manage parcels of land whose cleanup cost exceeds their total future economic value. And, like all Sacrifice Zone fences, this one has holes in it and is partially torn down in places. Young men blasted out of their minds on natural and artificial male hormones must have some place to do their idiotic coming of age rituals. They come in from burbclaves all over the area in their four-wheel drive trucks and tear across the open ground, slicing long, curling gashes into the clay cap that was placed on the really bad parts to prevent wind-blown asbestos from blizzarding down over Disneyland. YT is oddly satisfied to know that these boys have never even dreamed of an all-terrain vehicle like Ng's motorized wheelchair. It veers off the paved road with no loss in speed. Ride gets a little bumpy, and hits the chain link fence as if it were a fog bank, plowing a 100-foot section into the ground. It is a clear night, and so the sacrifice zone glitters, an immense carpet of broken glass and shredded asbestos. 100 feet away, some seagulls are tearing at the belly of a dead German shepherd lying on its back. There is a constant undulation of the ground that makes the shattered glass flash and twinkle. This is caused by vast, sparse migrations of rats. The deep, computer-designed imprints of suburban boys' fat, knobby tires paint giant runes on the clay, like the mystery figures in Peru that YT's mom learned about at the Neo-Aquarian Temple. Through the windows, YT can hear occasional bursts of either firecrackers or gunfire. She can also hear making new, even stranger sounds with his mouth. There is a built-in speaker system in this van, a stereo, though far be it from to actually listen to any tunes. YT can feel it turning on, can sense a nearly inaudible hiss coming from the speakers. The van begins to creep forward across the zone. The inaudible hiss gathers itself up into a low electronic hum. It's not steady, it wavers up and down, staying pretty low, like roadkill fooling around with his electric bass. Ings keeps changing the direction of the van, as though he's searching for something, and YT gets the sense that the pitch of the hum is rising. It's definitely rising, building up in the direction of a squeal. Snarls a command, and the volume is reduced. He's driving very slowly now. It is very possible that you might not have to buy any snow crash at all, he mumbles. We may have found an unprotected stash. What is this? What is this totally irritating noise? Bioelectric sensor, human cell membranes, grown in vitro, which means in glass, in a test tube. One side is exposed to outside air, the other side is clean. When a foreign substance penetrates the cell membrane into the clean side, it's detected. The more foreign molecules penetrate, the higher the pitch of the sound. Like a Geiger counter? Very much like a Geiger counter for cell-penetrating compounds, says. Like what? YT wants to ask, but she doesn't. Stops the van. He turns on some lights, very dim lights. That's how anal this guy is. He has gone to the trouble to install special dim lights in addition to all the bright ones. They are looking into a sort of bowl right at the foot of a major drum heap that is strewn with litter. Most of the litter is empty beer cans. In the middle is a fire pit. Many tire tracks converge here. Ah, this is good, says. A place where the young men gather to take drugs. YT rolls her eyes at this display of tubularity. This must be the guy who writes all those anti-drug pamphlets that they get at school. Like he's not getting 1,000,000 gallons of drugs every second through all of those gross tubes. I don't see any signs of booby traps, says. Why don't you go out there and see what kind of drug paraphernalia is out there? She looks at him like, what did you say? There's a toxics mask hanging on the back of your seat. What's out there, toxic-wise? Discarded asbestos from the shipbuilding industry. Marine anti-fouling paints that are full of heavy metals. They used PCBs for a lot of things, too. Great. I sense your reluctance, but if we can get a sample of snow crash from this drug-taking site, it will obviate the rest of our mission. Well, since you put it that way, YT says, and grabs the mask. It's a big rubber and canvas number that covers her whole head and neck. Feels heavy and awkward at first, but whoever designed it had the right idea. All the weight rests in the right places. There's also a pair of heavy gloves that she hauls on. They are way too big. Like the people at the glove factory never dreamed that an actual female could wear gloves. She trudges out onto the glass and asbestos soil of the zone, hoping that isn't going to slam the door shut and drive away and leave her here. Actually, she wishes he would. It would be a cool adventure. Anyway, she goes up to the middle of the drug-taking site. Is not too surprised to see a little nest of discarded hypodermic needles and some tiny little empty vials. She picks up a couple of the vials, reads their labels. "What did you find?" says when she gets back into the van, peels off the mask. "Needles, mostly hyponoxes. But there's a couple of ultralaminars and some mosquito 25s. "What does all this mean?" "Hyponox you can get at any buy and fly. People call them rusty nails. They're cheap and dull. Supposedly, the needles of poor black diabetics and junkies. Ultralaminars and mosquitoes are hip. You get them around fancy burgclaves. They don't hurt as much when you stick them in, and they have better design. You know, ergonomic plunges, hip color schemes." "What drug were they injecting?"
"Check it out,"
YT says, and holds up one of the vials toward Ing. Then it occurs to her that he can't exactly turn his head to look.
Where do I hold it so you can see it?"
she says. Sings a little song. A robot arm unfolds itself from the ceiling of the van, crisply yanks the vial from her hand, swings it around, and holds it in front of a video camera set into the dashboard. The typewritten label stuck onto the vial says, just testosterone. "Ha ha, a false alarm," Ing says. The van suddenly rips forward, starts heading right into the middle of the sacrifice zone.
"Want to tell me what's going on?" YT says, "since I have to actually do the work in this outfit."
"Cell walls," Ing says. "The detector finds any chemical that penetrates cell walls. So we homed in naturally on a source of testosterone. A red herring. How amusing. You see, our biochemists lead sheltered lives, did not anticipate that some people would be so mentally warped as to use hormones like they were some kind of drug. How bizarre." YT smiles to herself. She really likes the idea of living in a world where someone like Ing can get off calling someone else bizarre.
"What are you looking for?"
"Snow crash," Ing says. "Instead, we found the ring of 17.
"Snow crash is the drug that comes in the little tubes," YT says. "I know that. What's the Ring of 17? One of those crazy new rock groups that kids listen to nowadays?"
Snow crash penetrates the walls of brain cells and goes into the nucleus where the DNA is stored. So for purposes of this mission, we developed a detector that would enable us to find cell wall penetrating compounds in the air. But we didn't count on heaps of empty testosterone vials being scattered all over the place. All steroids, artificial hormones, share the same basic structure, a ring of 17 atoms that acts like a magic key that allows them to pass through cell walls. That's why steroids are such powerful substances when they are unleashed in the human body. They can go deep inside the cell, into the nucleus, and actually change the way a cell's function. The cell functions. To summarize, the detector is useless. A stealthy approach will not work. So we will go back to the original plan. You will buy some snow crash and throw it up in the air." IT doesn't quite understand that last part yet, but she shuts up for a while because in her opinion, Ing needs to pay more attention to his driving. Once they get out of that really creepy part, most of the sacrifice zone turns out to consist of a wilderness of dry brown weeds and large abandoned hunks of metal. There are big heaps of shit rising up from place to place, coal or slag or coke or smelt or something. Every time they come around a corner, they encounter a little plantation of vegetables, tended by Asians or South Americans. YT gets the impression that Ng wants to just run them over, but he always changes his mind at the last instant and swerves around them. Some Spanish-speaking blacks are playing baseball on a broad, flat area, using the round lids of 55-gallon drums as bases. They have parked half a dozen old beaters around the edges of the field and turned on their headlights to provide illumination. Nearby is a bar built into a scrappy mobile home, marked with a graffiti sign, The Sacrifice Zone. Lines of boxcars are stranded in a yard of rusted over railway spurs, nopal growing beneath nopal growing between the tires. The ties. Railroad ties. Blech. One of the boxcars has been turned into a Reverend Wayne's Pearly Gates franchise, and evangelical Centro Americans are lined up to do their penance and speak in tongues below the neon Elvis. There are no Neo Aquarian Temple franchises in the Sacrifice Zone. The warehouse area is not as dirty as the first place we went, Ing says reassuringly, so the fact that you can't use the Toxics mask won't be so bad. You may smell some chill fumes. YT does a double take at this new phenomenon, Ing using the street name for a controlled substance. You mean Freon? She says. Yes. The man who is the object of our inquiry is horizontally diversified. That is, he deals in a number of different substances. But he got his start in Freon. He's the biggest chill wholesaler slash retailer on the West Coast. Finally, YT gets it. Ing's van is air conditioned. Not with one of those shitty ozone safe air conditioners, but with the real thing. A heavy metal, high capacity, bone chilling frigid air blizzard blaster. It must use an incredible amount of Freon. For all practical purposes, that air conditioner is a part of Ing's body. YT's driving around with the world's only Freon junkie. You buy your supply of chill from this guy? Until now, yes. But for the future, I have an arrangement with someone else. Someone else. The Mafia. They are approaching the waterfront. Dozens of long, skinny, single-story warehouses run parallel down toward the water. They all share the same access road at this end. Smaller roads run between them, down toward where where the piers used to be. Abandoned tractor trailers are scattered around from place to place. Ing pulls his van off the access road into a little nook that is partly concealed between an old red brick power station and a stack of rusted out shipping containers. He gets it turned around so it's pointed out of here, kind of like he's expecting to leave rapidly. There's money in the storage compartment in front of you, Ing says. YT opens the glove compartment, as anyone else would call it, and finds a thick bundle of worn out, dirty $1 trillion bills. Ed Mises. Geez, couldn't you get any gippers? This is kinda bulky. This is more the kind of thing that a courier would pay with. Because we're all spawn scum, right? No comment. What is this, a quadrillion dollars? 1.5 quadrillion. Inflation, you know. What do I do? Fourth warehouse on the left, Ing says. When you get the tube, throw it up in the air. Then what? Everything else will be taken care of. YT has her doubts about that. But if she gets in trouble, well, she can always whip out those dog tags. While YT climbs down out of the van with her skateboard, Ing makes new sounds with his mouth. She hears a gliding and clunking noise resonating through the frame of the van, machinery coming to life. Turning back to look, she sees that a steel cocoon on the roof of the van has opened up. There's a miniature helicopter underneath it, all folded up. Its rotor blades spread themselves apart like a butterfly unfolding. Its name is painted on its side. Whirlwind Reaper. Hmm. Miniaturized helicopter. Hmm. 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 I wonder where that idea sounds familiar. Could it even be like, I don't know, modern day drones? When was this book written again? Oh, 1992. Right. And they started working on it, or Neil Stevenson and I forget the guy who he was writing it with at first. They started it a couple of years before then, so you're looking at Pretty early. If you think that's spooky, though, there's a book that William Gibson wrote back in the very early aughts, like pretty shortly post 9/11, that actually talks about using smartphones to control. Uh, they weren't quad rotor drones in the book. They were basically like helium balloons with fans on them, rotors, propellers on them, which I've also seen. Uh, and people just flying them around for recreation. Uh, so he saw the course of of trends going. William Gibson did, and really nailed that one. He nailed a couple other good ones like augmented reality spaces, uh, which is pretty cool. Alrighty, another sip of water here. Blech. That's right, splash half of it down my shirt. Real productive. Ah, okay. Moving right along. Chapter 32. It's pretty obvious which warehouse we're looking for here. Fourth one on the left. The road that runs down toward the waterfront is blocked off by several shipping containers, the big steel boxes you see on the backs of 18-wheelers. They are arranged in a herringbone pattern, so that in order to get past them, you have to slalom back and forth half a dozen times, passing through a narrow maze-like channel between high walls of steel. Guys with guns are perched on top, looking down at YT as she guides her plank through the obstacle course. By the time she makes it out into the clear, she's been heavily checked out. There's the occasional light bulb on a wire strung around, and even a couple of strings of Christmas tree lights. These are switched on, just to make her feel a little more welcome. She can't see anything, just lights making colored halos amid a generalized cloud of dust and fog. In front of her, access to the waterfront is blocked off by another maze of shipping containers. One of them has a graffiti sign. "The UCOD says, try some countdown today." What's the UCOD? UKOD. What's the UKOD? She says, just to break the ice a little. "Undisputed king of the ozone destroyers," says a man's voice. He is just in the act of jumping down from the loading dock of the warehouse to her left. Back inside the warehouse, YT can see electric lights and glowing cigarettes. "That's what we call Emilio." "Oh, right," YT says. "The Freon guy. I'm not here for chill." "Well," says the guy, a tall, rangy dude in his 40s, much too skinny to be 40 years old. He yanks the butt of a cigarette from his mouth and throws it away like a dart. "What'll it be, then?" "What does Snow Crash cost?" 1.75 gippers, the guy says. "I thought it was 1.5, YT says. The guy shakes his head. "Inflation, you know. Still, it's a bargain. Hell, that plank you're on is probably worth 100 gippers." "You can't even buy these for dollars," YT says, getting her back up. "Look, all I've got is $1.5 quadrillion. She pulls the bundle out of her pocket. She pulls the bundle out of her pocket. Oh, you just said that. Good golly. She pulls the bundle out of her pocket. The guy laughs, shakes his head, hollers back to his colleagues inside the warehouse. "You guys, we got a chick here who wants to pay in Mises." "Better get rid of them fast, honey," says a sharper, nastier voice, "or get yourself a wheelbarrow." It's an even older guy with a bald head, curly hair on the sides, and a paunch. He's standing up on the loading dock. "If you're not going to take it, just say so," YT says. All of this chatter has nothing to do with business. "We don't get chicks back here very often," the fat, bald old guy says. YT knows that this must be the UKOD himself. "So I'll give you a discount for being spunky. Turn around." "Fuck you," YT says. She's not going to turn around for this guy. Everyone within earshot laughs. Okay, do it, the UKOD says. The tall, skinny guy goes back over to the loading dock and hauls an aluminum briefcase down, sets it on top of a steel drum in the middle of the road so that it's at about waist height. Pay first, he says. She hands him the Mises. He examines the bundle, sneers, throws it back into the warehouse with a sudden backhand motion. All the guys inside laugh some more. He opens up the briefcase, revealing the little computer keyboard. He shoves his ID card into the slot, types on it for a couple of seconds. He unsnaps a tube from the top of the briefcase, places it into the socket in the bottom part. The machine draws it inside, does something, spits it back out. He hands the tube to YT. The red numbers on top are counting down from 10. When it gets down to 1, hold it up to your nose and start inhaling, the guy says. She's already backing away from him. You got a problem, little girl? He says. Not yet, she says. Then she throws the tube up in the air as hard as she can. The chop of the rotor blades comes out of nowhere. The whirlwind reaper blurs over their heads. Everyone crouches for an instant as surprise buckles their knees. The tube does not come back to Earth. You fucking bitch, the skinny guy says. That was a really cool plan, the UKOD says. But the part I can't figure is, why would a nice, smart girl like you participate in a suicide mission? The sun comes out. About a half a dozen suns, actually, all around them, up in the air, so that there are no shadows. The faces of the skinny man and the UKOD look flat and featureless under this blinding illumination. YT is the only person who can see worth a damn, because her night visions have compensated for it. The men wince and sag beneath the light. YT turns to look behind herself. One of the miniature suns is hanging above the maze of shipping containers, casting light into all its crannies, blinding the gunmen who stand guard there. The scene flashes too light and too dark, as her goggles' electronics try to make up their mind. But in the midst of this whole visual tangle, she gets one image printed indelibly on her retina. The gunmen going down like a tree line in a hurricane, and, for just an instant, a line of dark angular things silhouetted above the maze as they crest it like a cybernetic tsunami. Rat things. They have evaded the whole maze by leaping over it in long, flat parabolas. Along the way, some of them have slammed right through the bodies of men holding guns, like NFL fullbacks plowing full speed through nerdy sideline photographers. Then, as they land on the road in front of the maze, there is an instant burst of dust with frantic white sparks dancing around at the bottom, and while all this is happening, YT doesn't hear, she feels one of the rat things impacting on the body of the tall, skinny guy, hears his ribs cracking like a ball of cellophane. Hell is already breaking loose inside the warehouse, but her eyes are trying to follow the action, watching the sparks and dust contrails of more rat things, drawing themselves down the length of the road in an instant, and then going airborne to the top of the next barrier. 3 seconds have passed since she threw the tube into the air. She is turning back to look inside the warehouse, but someone's on top of the warehouse, catching her eye for a second. It's another gunman. A sniper, stepping out from behind an air conditioning unit, just getting used to the light, raising his weapon to his shoulder. YT winces as a red laser beam from his rifle sweeps across her eyes once, twice as he zeroes his sights on her forehead. Behind him, she sees the whirlwind reaper, its rotors making a disk under the brilliant light, a disk that is foreshortened into a narrow ellipse, and then into a steady silver line. Then it flies right past the sniper. The chopper pulls up into a hard turn, searching for additional prey, and something falls beneath it in a powerless trajectory. She thinks that it has dropped a bomb. But it's the head of the sniper, spinning rapidly, throwing out a fine pink helix under the light. The little chopper's rotor blade must have caught him in the nape of the neck. One part of her is dispassionately watching the head bounce and spin in the dust, and the other part of her is screaming her lungs out. She hears a crack, the first loud noise so far. She turns to follow the sound, looking in the direction of a water tower that looms above this area, providing a fine vantage point for a sniper. But then her attention is drawn by the pencil-thin blue-white exhaust of a tiny rocket that lances up into the sky from Ing's van. It doesn't do anything. It just goes up to a certain height and hovers, sitting on its exhaust. She doesn't care. She's kicking her way down the road now on her plank, trying to get something between her and that water tower. There's a second cracking noise. Before this sound even reaches her ears, the rocket darts horizontally like a minnow, makes one or two minor cuts to correct its course, zeroes in on that sniper's perch up in the water tower's access ladder. There's a great nasty explosion without any flame or light, like the loud pointless booms that you get sometimes at fireworks shows. For a moment, she can hear the clamor of shrapnel ringing through the ironwork of the water tower. Just before she kicks her way back into the maze, a dust line whips past her, snapping rocks and fragments of broken glass into her face. It shoots into the maze. She hears it ping-pong all the way through, kicking off the steel walls in order to change direction. It's a rat thing clearing the way for her. How sweet! Smooth move, X-Lax, she says, climbing back into Ing's van. Her throat feels thick and swollen. Maybe it's from screaming. Maybe it's the toxic waste. Maybe she's getting ready to gag. Didn't you know about the snipers? She says. If she can keep talking about the details of the job, maybe she can keep her mind off of what the Whirlwind Reaper did. I didn't know about the one on the water tower, Ing says, but as soon as he fired a couple of rounds, we plotted the bullets' trajectories on millimeter wave and backtraced them. He talks it to his van, and it pulls out of its hiding place, headed for I-405. Seems like kind of an obvious place to look for a sniper. He was in an unfortified position, exposed from all sides, Ing says. He chose to work from a suicidal position, which is not a typical behavior for drug dealers. Typically, they are more pragmatic. Now, do you have any other criticisms of my performance? Well, did it work? Yes. The tube was inserted into a sealed chamber inside the helicopter before it discharged its contents. It was then flash frozen in liquid helium before it could chemically self-destruct. We now have a sample of snow crash, something that no one else has been able to get. It is the kind of success on which reputations such as mine are constructed. How about the rat things? How about them? Are they back in the van now? Back there? YT jerks her head aft. Ing pauses a moment. YT reminds herself that he is sitting in his office in Vietnam in 1955 watching all of this on TV. Three of them are back, Ing says. Three are on their way back, and three of them I left behind to carry out additional pacification measures. You're leaving them behind? They'll catch up, Ing says. On a straightaway, they can run at 700 miles per hour. Is it true that they have nuke stuff inside of them? Radiothermal isotopes. What happens if one gets busted open? Everyone gets all mutated? If you ever find yourself in the presence of a destructive force powerful enough to decapsulate those isotopes, Ing says, radiation sickness will be the least of your worries. Will they be able to find their way back to us? Didn't you ever watch Lassie Come Home when you were a child? He asks. Or rather, more of a child than you are right now. So, she was right. The rat things are made from dog parts. That's cruel, she says. This brand of sentimentalism is very predictable, Ing says. To take a dog out of his body, keep him in a hutch all the time. When the rat thing, as you call it, is in his hutch, do you know what he's doing? Licking his electric nuts? Chasing frisbees through the surf. Forever. Eating steaks that grow on trees. Lying beside the fire in a hunting lodge. I haven't installed any testicle licking simulations yet, but now that you have brought it up, I shall consider it. What about when he's out of the hutch, running around doing errands for you? Can't you imagine how liberating it is for a pit bull terrier to be capable of running 700 miles an hour? YT doesn't answer. She is too busy trying to get her mind around this concept. Your mistake, Ing says, is that you think that all mechanically assisted organisms, like me, are pathetic cripples. In fact, we are better than we were before. Where do you get the pit bulls from? An incredible number of them are abandoned every day in cities all over the place. You cut up pound puppies? We save abandoned dogs from certain extinction and send them to what amounts to dog heaven. My friend Roadkill and I had a pit bull, Fido. We found it in an alley. Some asshole had shot it in the leg. We had a vet fix it up. We kept it in this empty apartment in Roadkill's building for a few months, played with it every day, brought it food. And then one day we came to play with Fido, and he was gone. Someone broke in and took him away. Probably sold him to a research lab. Probably, Ing says, but that's no way to keep a dog. It's better than the way he was living before. There's a break in the conversation as Ing occupies himself with talking to his van, maneuvering onto the Long Beach freeway, headed back into town. Do they remember stuff? YT says. To the extent that dogs remember anything, Ing says, we don't have any way of erasing memories. So maybe Fido was a rat thing somewhere right now. I would hope so, for his sake, Ing says. In a Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong franchise in Phoenix, Arizona, Ing Security Industries semi-autonomous guard unit B782 comes awake. The factory that put him together thinks of him as a robot named number B782, but he thinks of himself as a pit bull terrier named Fido. In the old days, Fido was a bad little doggy sometimes. But now, Fido lives in a nice little house, in a nice little yard. Now he has become a nice little doggy. He likes to lie in his house and listen to the other nice doggies bark. Fido is part of a big pack. Tonight there is a lot of barking from a place far away. When he listens to this barking, Fido knows that a whole pack of nice doggies is very excited about something. A lot of very bad men are trying to hurt a nice girl. This has made the doggies very angry and excited. In order to protect the nice girl, they are hunting some of the bad men. Which is as it should be. Fido does not come out of his house. When he first heard the barking, he became excited. He likes nice girls, and it makes him especially upset when bad men try to hurt them. Once there was a nice girl who loved him. That was before, when he lived in a scary place and he was always hungry and many people were bad to him. But the nice girl loved him and was good to him. Fido loves the nice girl very much. But he can tell from the barking of the other doggies that the nice girl is safe now. So he goes back to sleep. Aww, so sweet. Aww, cybernetically augmented security killing machines that are also dogs and sweeties. Sweetie dogs. Okay. Oh, okay. So, where are we? Why do I keep losing my page when I do this? I put in the bookmark, I swear, but I do it like 3 pages away. Because I'm marking where I'm trying to go, and it's not always. Whatever. Yeah, we are definitely on course for getting to where I want it to be, I think. Chapter 33. "Excuse me, Pod," YT says, stepping into the Babel/Infocalypse room. "Geez, this place looks like one of those things full of snow that you shake up." "Hi, YT." "Got some more intel for you, Pod." "Shoot." "Snow crash is a roid, or else it's similar to a roid. Yeah, that's it. It goes into your cell walls just like a roid, and then it does something to the nucleus of the cell."
"You were right," Hiro says to the librarian. "Just like herpes."
"This guy I was talking to said that it fucks with your actual DNA. I don't know what half of this shit means, but that's what he said."
"Who's this guy you were talking to?"
"Ing, of Ing Security Industries. Don't bother talking to him. He won't give you any intel," she says dismissively.
"Why are you hanging out with a guy like Ing?"
"Mob job. The Mafia has a sample of the drug for the first time, thanks to me and my pal Ing. Until now, it always self-destructed before they could get to it. So I guess they're analyzing it or something. Trying to make an antidote, maybe."
"Or trying to reproduce it."
"The Mafia wouldn't do that."
"Don't be a sap," Hiro says. "Of course they would." YT seems miffed at Hiro. "Look," he says, "I'm sorry for reminding you of this, but if we still had laws, the Mafia would be a criminal organization."
"But we don't have laws," she says. "So it's just another chain."
"Fine, all I'm saying is they may not be doing this for the benefit of humanity."
"And why are you in here holed up with this geeky Damon?" she says, gesturing at the librarian. "For the benefit of humanity? Or because you're chasing a piece of ass, whatever her name is?"
Okay, let's not talk about the Mafia anymore," Hiro says. "I have work to do."
"So do I."
YT zaps out again, leaving a hole in the metaverse that is quickly filled in by Hiro's computer. "I think she may have a crush on me," Hiro explains. "She seemed quite affectionate," the librarian says. "Okay," Hiro says, "back to work. Where did Ashura come from?" "Originally from Sumerian mythology. Hence she is also important in Babylonian, Assyrian, Canaanite, Hebrew, and Ugaritic myths, which are all descended from the Sumerian." "Interesting. So the Sumerian language died out, but the Sumerian myths were somehow passed on in the new languages." "Correct. Sumerian was used as the language of religion and scholarship by later civilizations, much as Latin was used in Europe during the Middle Ages. No one spoke it as their native language, but educated people could read it. In this way, Sumerian religion was passed on." "And what did Ashura do in Sumerian myths?" "The accounts are fragmentary. Few tablets have been discovered, and these are broken and scattered. It is thought that El Bob Rife has excavated many intact tablets, but he refuses to release them. The surviving Sumerian myths exist in fragments and have a bizarre quality. Lagos compared them to the imaginings of a febrile 2-year-old. Entire sections of them simply cannot be translated. The characters are legible and well known, but when put together they do not say anything that leaves an imprint on the modern mind." "Like instructions for programming a VCR." "There is a great deal of monotonous repetition. There is also a fair amount of what Lagos described as Rotary Club boosterism, scribes extolling the superior virtue of their city over some other city." "What makes one Sumerian city better than another one? A bigger ziggurat? A better football team?" "Better meh." "What are meh?" "Rules or principles that control the operation of society, like a code of laws, but on a more fundamental level." "I don't get it." "That is the point. Sumerian myths are not readable or enjoyable in the same sense that the Greek and Hebrew myths are. They reflect a fundamentally different consciousness from ours." "I suppose if our culture was based on Sumer, we would find them more interesting," Hiro says. Akkadian myths came Akkadian, because it's from Akkad. Akkadian myths came after the Sumerian and are clearly based on Sumerian myths to a large extent. It is clear that Akkadian redactors went through the Sumerian myths, edited out the, to us, bizarre and incomprehensible parts, and strung them together into longer works, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Akkadians were Semites, cousins of the Hebrews. What do the Akkadians have to say about her? She is a goddess of the erotic and of fertility. She also has a destructive, vindictive side. In one myth, Kirta, a human king, is made grievously ill by Asherah. Only El, king of the gods, can heal him. El gives certain persons the privilege of nursing at Asherah's breasts. El and Asherah often adopt human babies and let them nurse on Asherah. In one text, she is wet nurse to 70 divine sons. Spreading that virus, Hiro says. Mothers with AIDS can spread the disease to their babies by breastfeeding them. But this is the Akkadian version, right? Yes, sir. I want to hear some Sumerian stuff, even if it is untranslatable. Would you like to hear how Asherah made Enki sick? Sure. How this story is translated depends on how it is interpreted. Some see it as a fall from paradise story. Some see it as a battle between male and female or water and earth. Some see it as a fertility allegory. This reading is based on the interpretation of Bent Alster. Duly noted. To summarize, Enki and Ninhursag, who is Asherah, although in this story she also bears other epithets, live in a place called Dilmun. Dilmun is pure, clean, and bright. There is no sickness. People do not grow old. Predatory animals do not hunt. But there is no water. So Ninhursag pleads with Enki, who is a sort of water god, to bring water to Dilmun. He does so by masturbating among the reeds of ditches, masturbating among the reeds of the ditches and letting flow his life-giving semen, the water of the heart, as it is called. At the same time, he pronounces a Nam Shub, forbidding anyone to enter this area. He does not want anyone to come near his semen. Why not? The myth does not say. Then, Hiro says, he must have thought it was valuable or dangerous or both. Dilmun is now better than it was before. The fields produce abundant crops and so on. Excuse me, but how did Sumerian agriculture work? Did they use a lot of irrigation? They were entirely dependent upon it. So Enki was responsible, according to this myth, for irrigating the fields with his water of the heart. Enki was the water god, yes. Okay, go on. But Ninhursag, Asherah, violates his decree and takes Enki's semen and impregnates herself. After 9 days of pregnancy, she gives birth, painlessly, to a daughter, Ninmu. Ninmu walks on the river bank. Enki sees her, becomes inflamed, goes across the river, and has sex with her. With his own daughter. Yes, she has another daughter 9 days later, named Ninkura, and the pattern is repeated. Enki has sex with Ninkura too? Yes, and she has a daughter named Utu. Now, by this time, Ninhursag has apparently recognized a pattern in Enki's behavior, and so she advises Utu to stay in her house, predicting that Enki will then approach her bearing gifts and try to seduce her. Does he? Enki once again fills the ditches with the water of the heart, which makes things grow. The gardener rejoices and embraces Enki. Who's the gardener? Just some character in the story, the librarian says. He provides Enki with grapes and other gifts. Enki disguises himself as the gardener and goes to Utu and seduces her. But this time Ninhursag manages to obtain a sample of Enki's semen from Utu's thighs. My God, talk about your mother-in-law from hell. Ninhursag spreads the semen on the ground, and it causes 8 plants to sprout up. Does Enki have sex with the plants then? No, he eats them. In some sense, he learns their secrets by doing so. So here we have our Adam and Eve motif. Ninhursag curses Enki, saying, "Until thou art dead, I shall not look upon thee with the eye of life." Then she disappears, and Enki becomes very ill. 8 of his organs become sick, 1 for each of the plants. Finally, Ninhursag is persuaded to come back. She gives birth to 8 deities, 1 for each part of Enki's body that is sick, and Enki is healed. These deities are the pantheon of Dilmun, i.e., this act breaks the cycle of incest and creates a new race of male and female gods that can reproduce normally. I'm beginning to see what Lagos meant about the febrile 2-year-old. Ulster interprets the myth as an exposition of of a logical problem. Supposing that originally there was nothing but one creator, how could ordinary binary sexual relations come into being? Ah, there's that word binary again. You may remember that an unexplored fork earlier in our conversation that would have brought us to this same place by another route. This myth can be compared to the Sumerian creation myth, in which heaven and earth are united to begin with, but the world is not really created until the two are separated. Most creation myths begin with a paradoxical unity of everything, evaluated either as chaos or as paradise, and the world as we know it does not really come into being until this is changed. I should point out here that Enki's original name was Enkur, Lord of Kur. Kur was a primeval ocean, chaos, that Enki conquered. Every hacker can identify with that. But Asherah has similar connotations. Her name in the Ugaritic, Atiratu Yami, means she who treads on the sea dragon. Okay, so both Enki and Asherah were figures who had in some sense defeated chaos. And your point is that this defeat of chaos, the separation of the static, unified world into a binary system, is identified with creation. Correct. What else can you tell me about Enki? He was the N of the city of Eridu. What is an N? Is that like a king? A priest king of sorts. The N was the custodian of the local temple, where the Me, the rules of the society, were stored on clay tablets. Okay, where's Eridu? Southern Iraq. It has only been excavated within the past few years. By Rife's people? Yes, as Kramer has it, Enki is the god of wisdom, but this is a bad translation. His wisdom is not the wisdom of an old man, but rather a knowledge of how to do things, especially occult things. He astonishes even the other gods with shocking solutions to apparently impossible problems. He is a sympathetic god, for the most part, who assists humankind. Really? Yes. The most important Sumerian myths center on him. As I mentioned, he is associated with water. He fills the rivers and the extensive Sumerian canal system with his life-giving semen. He is said to have created the Tigris in a single epochal act of masturbation. He describes himself as follows: I am Lord. I am the one whose word endures. I am eternal. Others describe him: a word from you, and heaps and piles stack high with grain. You bring down the stars of heavens, you have computed their number. He pronounces the name of everything created. Pronounces the name of everything created? In many creation myths, to name a thing is to create it. He is referred to, in various myths, as expert who instituted incantations, word-rich, Enki, master of all the right commands. As Kramer and Meyer have it, his word can bring order where there had been only chaos, and introduce disorder where there had been harmony. He devotes a great deal of effort to imparting his knowledge to his son, the god Marduk, chief deity of the Babylonians. So the Sumerians worshipped Enki, and the Babylonians, who came after the Sumerians, worshipped Marduk, his son. Yes, and whenever Marduk got stuck, he would ask his father Enki for help. There is a representation of Marduk here on this stele, the Code of Hammurabi. According to Hammurabi, the code was given to him personally by Marduk. Hiro wanders over to the Code of Hammurabi and has a gander. The cuneiform means nothing to him, but the illustration on top is easy enough to understand, especially the part in the middle. Which is... Oops. One sec, some slight darkness here. While I grab the image I need. Yes, yes, that's centered-ish. Let's call it good. This is the image. Why exactly is Marduk handing Hammurabi a 1 and a 0 in this picture? Hiro asks. They were emblems of royal power, the librarian says. Their origin is obscure. Enki must have been responsible for that one, Hiro says. Enki's most important role as the creator and guardian of the Mei and the Gishur, the keywords and patterns that rule the universe. Tell me more about the Mei. To quote Kramer and Meyer again, they believed in the existence from time primordial of a fundamental, unalterable, comprehensive assortment of powers and duties, norms and standards, rules and regulations, known as Mei, relating to the cosmos and its components, to gods and humans, to cities and countries, and to the varied aspects of civilized life. Kind of like the Torah. Yes, but they have a kind of mystical or magical force, and they often deal with banal subjects, not just religions. Examples? In one myth, the goddess Inanna goes to Eridu and tracks Enki into giving her 94 Mei and brings them back to her home of Uruk, where they are greeted with much commotion and rejoicing. Inanna is the person that Juanita is obsessed with. Yes, sir. She is hailed as a savior because she brought the one perfect execution of the Mei. Execution? Like executing a computer program? Yes. Apparently, they are like algorithms for carrying out certain activities essential to society. Some of them have to do with the workings of priesthood and kingship. Some explain how to carry out religious ceremonies. Some relate to the arts of war and diplomacy. Many of them are about the arts and crafts music, carpentry, smithing, tanning, building, farming, even such simple tasks as lighting fires. The operating system of society. I'm sorry? When you first turn on a computer, it is an inert collection of circuits that can't really do anything. To start up the machine, you have to infuse those circuits with a collection of rules that tell it how to function, how to be a computer. It sounds as though these Mei served as the operating system of the society, organizing an inert collection of people into a functioning system. As you wish. In any case, Enki was the guardian of the Mei. So he's a good guy, really. He was the most beloved of the gods. He sounds kind of like kind of a hacker, which makes his Nam Shub very difficult to understand. If he was such a nice guy, why did he do the Babel thing? This is considered to be one of the mysteries of Enki. As you have noticed, his behavior was not always consistent with modern norms. I don't buy that. I don't think he actually fucked his sister, daughter, and so on. That story has to be a metaphor for something else. I think it is a metaphor for some kind of recursive informational process. This whole myth stinks of it. To these people, water equals semen. Makes sense because they probably had no concept of pure water. It was all brown and muddy and full of viruses anyway. But from a modern standpoint, semen is just a carrier of information, both benevolent sperm and malevolent viruses. Enki's water, his semen, his data, his Mei, flow throughout the country of Sumer and cause it to flourish. As you may be aware, Sumer existed on the floodplain between two major rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is where all the clay came from. They took it directly from the riverbeds. So Enki even provided them with their medium for conveying information, clay. They wrote on wet clay and then they dried it out, got rid of the water. If water got to it later, the information was destroyed. But if they baked it and drove out all the water, sterilized Enki's semen with heat, then the tablet lasted forever, immutable, like the words of the Torah. Do I sound like a maniac? I don't know, the librarian says, but you do sound a little like Lagos. I'm thrilled. Next thing you know, I'll turn myself into a gargoyle.
And just to reinforce that this is in fact a real thing, this is well, the actual object, the physical object, is a real thing. This is a picture of it. If you look really closely, you can see the little ring around his hand, as well as the line looking rather like a 1 and a 0, or the on-off button of a computer. If you have a computer near you, look at that on-off button. It's a circle with a line in it. Hmm.
Hmm. One doth wonder. Uh, it should be noted at this point that there is a lot of the influence for some of the ideas for this book uh, owe their uh, birth, their origin, to Julian James's. I'm gonna botch the title. Why? The name of the book is of the origin of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind. So that's kind of where he's getting this, because in that book, this guy Julian James posits that before a certain period of time, you're looking at a stretch, pretty much anything before like a couple thousand BC, like 1000 to 2000, 1000 to 3000 BC, people basically behaved very differently, and they were very, very different than what we would recognize as normal human behavior now. Uh, they, honest to goodness, believed that after someone died, if they had like a mummy of them or even a statue of them in their house, they could communicate with them. And I don't mean that in like a superstitious way. They literally may have heard voices or seen visions, as the case may be, being directed and told what to do. What Neil Stevenson in Snow Crash is doing is he's taking that one step further and making the allegory that, well, if you have people who are like that, uh, and basically are told what to do by things like the Code of Hammurabi, they're basically programmable. And as we know, it's actually true. People basically are programmable. You can do aversion therapy, positive reinforcement, uh, all the social and cultural norms you pick up as a child. That's basically being programmed. So what Neil Stevenson is doing here is basically taking those ideas and being like, hey, maybe there was a literal programming language used, like binary or hexadecimal code or C++, as the case may be. Um, and maybe it was used to literally program people like computers or like computer viruses. So that's the idea that's being bandied around here. All right, I'm going to do. Actually, you know what? It is 2:01 right now, my time. It has been about 2 hours. And I do have a bunch of stuff I got to do. And that's actually a pretty logical stopping point because there's, yeah, if I, it's going to wind up interrupting a pretty dramatic event, the next chapter. I realized this particular reading segment was a bit well, literally half of it has been history lesson, and that's going to continue for like another chapter or two that deal with Hiro. But it is going to change, I promise. I'm flipping ahead right now to see when that stops, but it does. And when it stops, oh, buddy. And meanwhile, this whole time, YT is uh, things go down. I mean, things have already gone down. She has been reacquainted with rat things. She's met Ing of Ing Securities. Okay, it's YT. We get an introduction to Fedland, where the Federales live. Um, okay. Yeah, it's basically two more hero focused chapters are going to be history lessons, and then it's pretty much things start moving and do not stop after that point, and things go continually bonkers. We also have some interactions with our good friend Raven in the not too distant future. I say good friend, I mean the dude is an absolute madman and a terror. There is also a one, two, three, one, two, three, four, just shy 5 page memo, which is absolutely brutal. Oh, it's an email memo that's coming up in a few pages that is going to be a real thrill to read aloud. It is dry, deliberately so. That's the intention. All right, folks. I hope you have enjoyed. I am gonna have to call it for today. Let me turn that off. Let me turn that on. I hope you've enjoyed. If you're watching this live, fantastic. Let me know you're out there. Um, Thanks for tuning in, Lords Flores Gonzalez. I'm sorry I didn't reply immediately when you typed. And I do try to do this every week, every Saturday at about 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. If not, you can, of course, catch them all. They're all posted to YouTube. Um, I should really include links. I really, really should get around to that. That would be really, really smart. Um, I'll get around to that eventually. I've only been doing this for what, like a year, and I still don't have a solid procedure on that. In any event, hope you're enjoying either during or after the fact, and I will keep doing these. I also have other streams throughout the week. I have a Mecha Mondays stream, which I haven't done for the past like 2-3 weeks because I've had events have conspired against me, where I do something mecha related. I also have a Warframe Wednesdays stream where I do something Warframe related, all at about usually starting at about 12 noon Eastern Standard and continuing for around 2 hours. Um, I am always open to feedback, so please tell me how I'm doing. Tell me what I'm doing right. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Um, like, follow, subscribe, whatever the metrics things are you're supposed to do. I I don't care. I'm not doing this for money. I should probably set up a Patreon or something, but or a GoFundMe or whatever. Just if people wanted to do that, because I don't have the infrastructure set up on any of the sites I stream to actually handle that for various reasons. Namely, they want you to have, I don't know, 2,000 followers or something bonkers. Uh, and like 200 people that tune in on the reg. No, not happening. In order for them to start just giving you money, and that's not happening. So yeah, thanks again for tuning in. Have a great week, and read to you next time. Bye.